My sister mocked me for treating my cats like children at my niece's party. But when my husband walked in, the truth left everyone shocked. This happened last weekend at my niece Emma's 5th birthday party, and I'm still processing everything that went down. Some background. I'm 28 and I've been dealing with my older sister Karen's 32 passive-aggressive comments about my life choices for years. She got married at 22, had 3 kids by 26, and somehow decided that made her the authority on what constitutes a real adult life. Meanwhile, I focused on my career, traveled, lived in a nice apartment with my 2 cats, Mr. Whiskers and Luna, and genuinely enjoyed my independence. Karen never missed an opportunity to make little digs. Family dinners were peppered with comments like, "Must be nice having all that free time," or, "I guess some people just aren't ready for real responsibility." The extended family would chuckle awkwardly, and I'd usually just smile and change the subject. I love my nieces and nephews, and I didn't want to cause drama. But Karen's favorite line was always about me playing house with my cats. She'd use this whenever I talked about home improvements, cooking elaborate meals, or basically anything that suggested I had a fulfilling domestic life without a husband and kids. "Oh, still playing house with your cats" became her go-to dismissal, usually delivered with that condescending smile that made my blood boil. The comments had gotten particularly brutal over the past year, when I'd renovated my kitchen, spending weeks researching the perfect backsplash and choosing appliances. Karen's response was, "Wow, such an elaborate setup just to heat up fancy feast." When I'd hosted Thanksgiving dinner for the first time, creating a beautiful tablescape and cooking for 12 people, she'd walked into my dining room and said, "This is gorgeous, Emma, but it's a shame it's just for practice. Maybe someday you'll get to do this for a real family." The worst part was how the rest of the family had started to go along with it. What began as Karen's individual cruelty had somehow become accepted family humor. My aunt would ask about my fur babies with a patronizing COO. My cousin would joke about my fancy cat palace whenever I mentioned any home improvement. Even my grandmother, who I'd always been close to, had started making comments about how I was married to my career and my cats. It wasn't just the family gatherings either. Karen had started posting on social media with subtle digs. She'd share articles about the cat lady epidemic and tag me, or post photos of her kids with captions like "so grateful for my real family," with emphasis that felt pointed. Her friends would like and comment, creating this echo chamber where my lifestyle was a running joke. Here's what Karen didn't know. About 2 years ago, I met James at a work conference. He was a single dad to the most adorable 3-year-old girl named Sophie. Her mom had left when Sophie was barely a year old, just packed up and disappeared one day, leaving James to figure out single parenthood alone. We started dating slowly, carefully, because James was rightfully protective of Sophie and wanted to make sure anyone in his life was serious about being in hers too. The first time James told me about Sophie, we were having coffee after a particularly intense day of presentations. His whole demeanor changed when he talked about her. His voice got softer, his eyes lit up, and he pulled out his phone to show me pictures with the pride that only a parent truly understands. She was this tiny thing with wild curly hair and the biggest brown eyes I'd ever seen, grinning toothlessly at the camera while covered in what looked like spaghetti sauce. "She's everything to me," he'd said simply. "Her mother leaving nearly destroyed me, but Sophie kept me going. I can't imagine loving anyone more than I love that little girl." I should have been intimidated. Dating a single parent is complicated under the best circumstances, and James made it clear that Sophie's well-being came first, always. But something about the way he talked about her, the obvious depth of his love and commitment, made me more interested, not less. Here was a man who understood what real responsibility looked like, who had proven he could put someone else's needs above his own without resentment. Our first few months of dating were careful and slow. We met for coffee during Sophie's preschool hours, had dinner dates after she was asleep, talked on the phone when she was with her babysitter. James was methodical about keeping his dating life separate from his daughter's world until he was sure about someone's long-term potential. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. He told me after Sophie had gotten attached to a woman he'd dated briefly when she was 2, only to be confused and upset when that relationship ended. When James finally decided he was ready for me to meet Sophie, he planned it like a military operation. We met at a neutral location, a children's museum, on a Saturday morning. Sophie was shy at first, hiding behind James's legs and peeking out at me with curious eyes. But she warmed up quickly when she realized I was genuinely interested in the things she wanted to show me, not just pretending to care to impress her dad. We spent 3 hours at that museum, and by the end, Sophie was holding my hand and asking if I wanted to see her favorite exhibit again. When James suggested we get lunch together, she nodded enthusiastically and spent the entire meal telling me about her preschool friends, her favorite books, and her pet goldfish named Bubbles, who had died the week before and was now swimming in fish heaven. "I like her, Daddy," she announced as we were leaving the restaurant, speaking about me like I wasn't standing right there. "She listens good, and she didn't try to fix my hair." James laughed and swept her up into his arms. "High praise from the peanut gallery," he told me with a grin. That was the beginning of everything. Sophie and I clicked in a way that surprised everyone, especially me. I'd never spent much time around small children, but something about her earnest curiosity and complete lack of filter was absolutely charming. She asked a million questions about everything, had strong opinions about which foods could touch each other on her plate, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every dog we encountered on our walks. The transition from Auntie Emma to Mama Emma happened gradually, then all at once. It started when Sophie had a nightmare one night during a sleepover. She woke up crying and James was in the shower, so I went to comfort her. I sat on her bed and rubbed her back while she told me about the scary dream. And when she finally calmed down, she snuggled into my side and whispered, "Thanks, Mama Emma." My heart nearly stopped. James found us like that 20 minutes later. Sophie fast asleep against my shoulder, me wide awake and emotional, staring at this little person who had just claimed me as family without any ceremony or official declaration. "Did she just?" James whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He sat down on the bed beside us, reaching over to smooth Sophie's hair. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," I admitted, "and completely in love with both of you." That's when we started talking seriously about the future. James explained that Sophie's biological mother had relinquished all parental rights when she left. She'd signed papers and everything, wanting a completely clean break. If Sophie wanted me to adopt her legally, and if James and I got married, the process would be relatively straightforward. But only if it's what you really want, James emphasized. "Being a parent is forever, Emma. There's no casual about it. If you're not ready for that level of commitment, I need to know now before Sophie gets any more attached." I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. "I'm ready," I told him. "I've been ready since that first day at the museum when she held my hand." Moving in together 8 months ago felt like the most natural thing in the world. Sophie helped me pack, carefully wrapping my more fragile items in tissue paper and labeling boxes in her distinctive preschooler handwriting. "For Gil," one box said with a drawing of what I think was supposed to be a cat. "Emma's thing," said another, decorated with hearts and flowers. James's house was bigger than my apartment, with a proper backyard and a guest room that Sophie immediately claimed as the playroom where Mama's cats can live. We set up cat trees and toys, and within a week Mr. Whiskers and Luna had settled in like they'd always lived there. The Mama Emma phase lasted about 2 months before Sophie shortened it to just Mama one evening at dinner. She said it so casually, asking me to pass the ketchup, but I almost didn't catch it. But James heard, and the look of pure joy on his face made me realize this was as big a moment for him as it was for me. "Are you okay with that?" I asked Sophie later when I was tucking her into bed. Calling me Mama. She looked at me like I'd asked the world's most obvious question. "You are my mama," she said matter-of-factly. "You make my lunch and read me stories and help me brush my teeth. And you love me. That's what mamas do, out of the mouths of babes." We've been talking about making things official, both the relationship and the adoption. Sophie was already mine in every way that mattered, and James had been looking at engagement rings. We were planning to announce everything to our family soon, but James wanted to propose first, and I wanted Sophie to be comfortable with the idea before we made it public. The only people who knew about James and Sophie were my best friend Mia, and my younger brother Alex. I'd sworn them to secrecy because I wanted to tell everyone properly, maybe at a family dinner where I could explain the situation thoughtfully. I also, if I'm being honest, was savoring the idea of watching Karen's face when she realized I had the family life she'd always implied I was incapable of achieving. So when Emma's birthday party rolled around, I showed up alone as usual, my heart heavy with the secret I was carrying. James was at home with Sophie, who was fighting a minor cold and needed her afternoon nap. But there was more to it than that. We'd actually planned this whole thing out over the past week. See, I'd been dropping hints to my family for months about big changes coming and exciting news soon, but nobody seemed to take me seriously. Karen had rolled her eyes and asked if I was finally getting a second cat. Mom had wondered if I was planning to buy a house. Dad had joked that maybe I was going to start dating someone from my office. The truth was, James and I had been discussing how and when to introduce him and Sophie to my family, and we'd finally decided that Emma's birthday party might be the perfect opportunity. It was a family gathering, but casual enough that we could gauge reactions without the pressure of a formal dinner or holiday celebration. But we'd also decided to make it interesting. James suggested that maybe I should go alone first, see how the conversation naturally unfolded, and then he and Sophie could join later if Sophie was feeling up to it. Let them make their assumptions, he'd said with a mischievous grin, and we'll show up and blow their minds. I'd agreed, partly because I thought it might be fun, but mostly because I was curious to see how my family would react when confronted with the reality versus their perception of my life. Would they be happy for me? Surprised? Apologetic for their years of commentary? What I hadn't anticipated was Karen going full nuclear at her daughter's birthday party. The party was at Karen's house. She'd gone all out with a princess theme, complete with a bounce house in the backyard and more pink decorations than a Barbie fever dream. Her house always made me slightly dizzy, every surface covered with kid-related paraphernalia, toys scattered across every room, the constant low-level chaos that comes with 3 children under 8 years old. I arrived with the dollhouse I'd carefully selected for Emma, along with a smaller gift bag containing accessories, tiny furniture sets, miniature dolls, even a little family of pets that reminded me of my own cats. I'd spent weeks researching the perfect dollhouse, reading reviews, and comparing features because I genuinely wanted to give Emma something special that would grow with her imagination. The extended family was all there. My parents, Karen's in-laws, various aunts and uncles and cousins. About 20 people total crowded into Karen's living room and spilling out into the kitchen. The noise level was typical for our family gatherings. Multiple conversations happening simultaneously, kids running around shrieking with excitement, adults trying to talk over the chaos. When Emma opened my gift, the room actually quieted for a moment. The dollhouse was beautiful, a Victorian-style 3-story house with intricate details, working lights, and enough rooms to fuel hours of imaginative play. Emma's gasp of delight was audible across the room. "Oh my gosh, Aunt Emma, this is so cool." She immediately started examining every detail, opening tiny doors and pointing out features to her younger siblings. "Look, there's even a little bathtub and stairs that actually work." I felt genuinely pleased watching her reaction. This was why I loved giving gifts, finding something that perfectly matched the recipient's interests and seeing their genuine joy. Emma had always been drawn to miniature things, spending hours arranging her small toys into elaborate scenarios. That's when Karen struck. "Wow, Emma, looks like Aunt Emma is still playing house. Now she's just getting you to do it too." She laughed, and several relatives chuckled along. "I mean, at least someone's getting some use out of Emma's domestic fantasies, right?" I felt my cheeks burn, but I just smiled. I'm glad she likes it. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe she was showing off for our cousins, but she decided to really go for it. "You know what I love about Emma?" she announced to the room, gesturing toward me with her wine glass. "She's 28 and still playing house with her cats like she's living in some fantasy world. Most people grow out of that phase, but Emma is really committed to the bit." The room got quiet. Even for Karen, this felt meaner than usual. Our mom looked uncomfortable and Dad was suddenly very interested in his piece of cake. But Karen was on a roll. I mean, don't get me wrong, the cat lady lifestyle works for some people. Very low maintenance, no real responsibility. Must be nice to have all that freedom too. "What do you do again?" Arrange your throw pillows and cook fancy meals for one? Several people laughed, not kind laughter, but that uncomfortable social laughter people do when someone's being cruel, but they don't know how to stop it. Karen basked in the attention, her smile getting wider. Maybe someday Emma will join the rest of us in the real world, but until then, we'll just keep watching her playhouse with Mr. Whiskers and Luna. She raised her glass in a mock toast to Emma's very important domestic achievements. I sat there feeling humiliated and angry, but also oddly calm because I knew something Karen didn't. I checked my phone, 3:47 p.m. Sophie's nap usually ended around 4, and James had texted earlier asking if he should bring her by if she woke up feeling better. I told him maybe, depending on how the party was going. I texted him quickly, "If Sophie's up and feeling okay, you should come by. I think it's time." His response was immediate, "On our way," with a red heart emoji. I looked up at Karen, who was still glowing from her performance, accepting congratulations from our cousin Brett about her hilarious roast of my lifestyle. I smiled sweetly. "You know what, Karen, you're absolutely right. I have been playing house." I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "But here's the thing about playing house, sometimes you get so good at it that it stops being pretend." Karen looked confused, but before she could respond, we heard a car door shut outside. Then footsteps on the front porch. The front door opened and James walked in, gently carrying a sleepy Sophie who was rubbing her eyes and clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. She was wearing the adorable yellow dress with tiny sunflowers that we picked out together last week, her curly brown hair in 2 small pigtails tied with matching ribbons. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. James surveyed the room, taking in the decorations and the cluster of surprised faces all staring at him. Sophie was waking up more, looking around with curious eyes. "Sorry we're late," James said casually, his voice carrying that natural confidence that made me fall for him in the first place. Someone needed her beauty sleep. He kissed Sophie's forehead gently, but she woke up feeling much better and asking for Mama. He looked directly at me with that warm smile that still made my heart skip. "Go to Mama, sweetheart." Sophie perked up immediately, her face breaking into the brightest smile. "Mommy!" she squealed, reaching her arms out toward me. I walked over and took her from James, lifting her up and spinning her around once before settling her on my hip. She immediately snuggled into my shoulder, one small hand playing with my necklace, a habit she developed over the past few months. "Hi, baby girl," I murmured, kissing her temple. "Are you feeling better?" "Uh-huh," she nodded, then looked around at all the decorations with wide eyes. "Is this the princess party you told me about?" "It is. This is Emma's birthday party. You remember Emma, right? She's your age?" Sophie nodded seriously, then whispered loudly, "Can I play with the princess house?" I looked over at the dollhouse where little Emma was still sitting, staring at us with her mouth open. "We should ask Emma first. It's her special day." The silence in the room was deafening. Karen's face had gone through several color changes, red to white to an alarming shade of purple. Mom was clutching Dad's arm, her eyes wide. Our cousins were looking back and forth between me and Karen like they were watching a tennis match. James, bless him, seemed completely oblivious to the tension. He walked over and extended his hand to my parents. "You must be Emma's parents. I'm James and this little one is Sophie." He gestured toward us with obvious pride and affection. "I've heard so much about both of you. Emma talks about family dinners all the time. She makes that famous lasagna recipe she learned from you, Mrs. Chen. Sophie asks for it at least twice a week." Mom shook his hand automatically, still looking shell-shocked. "Oh, that's nice to meet you, James." Sophie had squirmed down from my arms and was now standing next to me, holding my hand while staring at the dollhouse with obvious longing. Little Emma, to her credit, seemed to shake off her surprise first. "Do you want to play?" she asked Sophie shyly. Sophie looked up at me for permission. I nodded, and she carefully approached the dollhouse, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Emma. Within minutes they were chattering about which room the family should eat dinner in, and whether the tiny dog should sleep upstairs or downstairs. James wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "How's the party been?" he asked quietly. "Oh, you know, the usual family dynamics." I leaned into him, enjoying the solid warmth of his presence, and the way he always made everything feel more manageable. Karen finally found her voice. Emma, her voice was tight, controlled. Could I speak with you privately? I looked at her for a long moment. Actually, Karen, I think we're good. Unless you wanted to apologize to James and Sophie for the awkward welcome, because they're going to be at a lot more family events, and I'd hate for things to start off on the wrong foot. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Brett, never one to read a room, chose that moment to loudly ask, "So wait, Emma, you have a kid? Since when?" "Since always," Sophie piped up from the floor, not looking up from the dollhouse. James chuckled. Sophie's sense of time is still developing. We've all been together for about 8 months now, but Emma's been part of Sophie's life for almost 2 years. Haven't you, sweetheart? He looked at me with such genuine love that I felt my heart swell. 2 years? Mom's voice was faint. Emma, why didn't you tell us? I took a deep breath. I wanted to make sure we were serious before introducing Sophie to everyone. James and I wanted her to feel secure in our relationship before involving extended family. We were planning to announce everything soon. Announce what exactly? Karen's voice had a sharp edge. James grinned and pulled me closer. Well, I was hoping to do this more privately, but... He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emma, I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks waiting for the perfect moment, but I'm realizing the perfect moment is just whenever we're all together. My heart stopped. Sophie looked up from her play and gasped. Daddy, is that the special ring? It is, Princess. Should I ask Mama the special question? Sophie nodded enthusiastically and scrambled to her feet, running over to us. James dropped to one knee right there in Karen's living room, surrounded by pink decorations and the smell of birthday cake. Emma, you've made our little family complete in ways I never knew were possible. Sophie loves you like you've been her mama from day one, and I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. Will you marry us, both of us? I was crying before he finished talking. Yes, I whispered, then louder, yes, of course. Yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger. A beautiful vintage-style setting with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light perfectly. Sophie cheered and threw her arms around both of us, creating a 3-way hug that felt like coming home. The room erupted in surprised congratulations. Mom was crying. Dad was shaking James's hand and patting his back, and even little Emma was clapping excitedly from her spot by the dollhouse. Karen stood frozen in the middle of it all, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. But Emma, she finally said, her voice small and confused. You never said, you always seem so... So what, Karen? I asked gently, still holding Sophie and admiring my ring. So content with my life, so happy with my choices, so comfortable being myself, so alone, she finished weakly. I was never alone, I said, looking around at James, Sophie, and my family. I was just private. There's a difference. James was now deep in conversation with Dad about his work as a software engineer, and Sophie dragged little Emma over to meet Grandpa and Grandma Chen as she'd apparently decided to call my parents. Mom looked delighted, immediately asking Sophie about her dress and her stuffed elephant. You know what the funny thing is, Karen? I said quietly, moving closer to my sister. All those comments about me playing house, you were right. I was playing house. I was learning how to be a partner, how to be a parent, how to build something real and lasting. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Emma, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I know you didn't. But here's what I need you to understand. Even if I had stayed single forever, even if it had just been me and my cats for the rest of my life, that would have been a valid choice too. My worth isn't determined by whether I have a husband and kids. She nodded, wiping her eyes. You're right, I think I've been jealous, honestly. You always seem so confident, so sure of yourself. I got married so young, and sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to have that independence you had. The grass is always greener, I said softly. But Karen, you have a beautiful family. Your kids adore you, and you're a great mom. We just took different paths. She smiled tentatively. Can I start over with James and Sophie? I looked over at my new little family. James was now sitting on the floor with both Sophie and Emma, helping them set up an elaborate dollhouse scenario involving a tea party with all the tiny furniture. Sophie was explaining very seriously that the daddy doll needed to sit in the blue chair because it matched his eyes just like her daddy. "I'd like that," I told Karen. "But no more comments about my life choices, okay? Sophie's watching and learning, and I want her to grow up knowing that there are lots of ways to be happy." Karen nodded. "Deal. And Emma, congratulations. Really, James seems wonderful and Sophie is absolutely precious." "She is," I agreed, watching as Sophie carefully placed a tiny cake on the dollhouse dining table. "She's been the best surprise of my life." The rest of the party was a blur of introductions, explanations, and excited planning. Sophie charmed everyone, calling my parents grandma and grandpa like she'd known them forever, and asking if she could be in Emma's class at school since they were almost the same age. James fit in seamlessly, discussing sports with my uncle and sharing parenting stories with Karen's husband. When it was time to sing happy birthday to little Emma, Sophie insisted on standing next to her new cousin and sang louder than anyone else. As we were getting ready to leave, she hugged Karen and said, "Thank you for the princess party. Mama said we might have a princess party for my birthday too, and you can come if you want." Karen looked at me over Sophie's head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I would love that, sweetheart." In the car on the way home, Sophie chatted excitedly about the party, her new cousins, and her extra grandparents. James reached over and squeezed my hand. "So," he said with a grin, "that went well." I laughed, spinning my new ring around my finger. Better than I could have imagined. "Mama?" Sophie said from the back seat, "Can we play house when we get home? But, like the real kind where we're all actually a family." I met James's eyes in the rearview mirror, both of us smiling. "We already are, baby girl," I told her. "We already are." About the adoption process, James and I met with a family lawyer this week. And because Sophie's biological mother signed away all rights and has had no contact for over 2 years, the process should be relatively straightforward once we're married. Sophie is incredibly excited about making it official, as she puts it. She's been practicing writing Sophie Emma last name and asking if she can call James's parents extra grandparents in addition to my parents. Several people asked about the family dynamics afterward. Karen and I had a long conversation the day after the party. She admitted that she'd been struggling with some postpartum depression after her youngest was born, and that attacking my lifestyle was her way of making herself feel better about her own choices. She started therapy, which I'm really proud of her for. She also apologized to James directly, which he handled with more grace than she probably deserved. The rest of the family has been incredibly welcoming. My parents are absolutely smitten with Sophie. She's their first grandchild since Karen's kids live across the country, and we only see them a few times a year. Mom has already started teaching Sophie to bake, and Dad bought her a tiny toolbox so she can help with projects around our house. My grandmother, who I was worried might struggle with a non-traditional family situation, surprised everyone by immediately declaring Sophie her great-granddaughter and asking when we were planning to give her a great-great-grandchild. "This one needs a little brother or sister," she announced at last Sunday's family dinner, while Sophie nodded seriously in agreement. About the wedding planning, we've decided on a small ceremony next April in my parents' backyard, weather permitting. Sophie will indeed be both flower girl and ring bearer, carrying the rings in a tiny basket that she's already picked out. She's also informed us that Mr. Whiskers and Luna need to be in the wedding photos because they're family too. The most touching development has been watching Sophie's relationship with little Emma develop. They've become genuine friends, not just cousins thrown together by circumstance. Emma has started asking her mom if Sophie can come to more family events. And last weekend, Sophie drew Emma a picture of the dollhouse with both their names on it, labeling it "Our House for Playing." James has been amazing through all of this. He keeps saying he can't believe how lucky we got, having everything work out so perfectly. But honestly, I think we made our own luck by being patient and careful and putting Sophie's needs first throughout our entire relationship. A few people mentioned in the comments that they're in similar situations, dating single parents or being single parents themselves, and wanted advice. The biggest thing I learned is that you can't rush these relationships. Sophie's acceptance of me didn't happen overnight, and there were definitely moments in those first few months where I wondered if I was cut out for step-parent life. Kids are honest in ways that can be brutal. Sophie once told me my pancakes were okay but not as good as Daddy's, and that my singing voice was kind of scratchy. But that honesty is also what makes their love so genuine when it comes. Also, to anyone dealing with family members who constantly criticize their life choices, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your happiness. I spent years letting Karen's comments chip away at my confidence, second-guessing my choices, and wondering if maybe she was right about my life being somehow lesser or incomplete. The truth is, my life was complete before James and Sophie. They just made it different, and in many ways better. But different doesn't mean better, and better doesn't invalidate what came before. Someone asked if I regret not telling my family about James and Sophie sooner. Honestly, no. Those 8 months of privacy were precious. We got to be a family without outside opinions or pressure, without well-meaning but overwhelming relatives trying to speed up our timeline or offer unsolicited advice. Sophie got to bond with me without feeling like she was performing for an audience, and James and I got to figure out our relationship without family commentary. The secrecy also made the reveal so much more satisfying. I'll admit it, watching Karen's face go through that entire spectrum of emotions was one of the most vindictively pleasant moments of my life. She spent years making me feel small and inadequate, and in one moment all of that crumbled. Not because I was trying to hurt her, but because the truth was so different from her assumptions. James and I got married 3 weeks ago in my parents' backyard, exactly as we planned. The weather was perfect, Sophie was the most adorable flower girl ring bearer in history, and yes, we did get professional photos with the cats. Mr. Whiskers tolerated the bow tie for exactly 5 minutes, which was long enough for a few shots before he stalked off to sulk under the porch. The adoption paperwork is almost complete. Sophie will officially be Sophie Emma, our last name, by Christmas, which she's decided is the best Christmas present ever. She's already started a countdown calendar. Karen and I have rebuilt our relationship into something much healthier. She's been in therapy for 4 months now and is doing much better. She helped plan the wedding, and her speech at the reception was genuinely moving. She apologized publicly for her years of comments and talked about how watching James, Sophie, and me together taught her that families come in all different forms and love is what makes them real. The most unexpected development is that Karen's therapy journey inspired our mom to start therapy too. Apparently, watching Karen work through her issues made Mom realize she had some of her own patterns to examine. It's been good for our whole family dynamic. Sophie is thriving in kindergarten and has made friends with several classmates who also have bonus parents, as her teacher calls step-parents. She started a little club called Mixed Up Families, where kids talk about their different family structures. According to her teacher, Sophie's matter-of-fact attitude about having a mama who chose me and a daddy who got me first has helped other kids feel more confident about their own family situations. James and I are talking about having a baby together in a year or 2. Sophie is campaigning hard for a little sister, specifically requesting one with curly hair like mine, but maybe with mama's eyes. She's already planning to teach the baby about cats and how to properly brush their fur. Mr. Whiskers and Luna have fully adapted to their roles as big siblings to a human. Luna still sleeps in Sophie's room every night, and Mr. Whiskers has appointed himself the official supervisor of homework time, sitting on Sophie's desk and occasionally knocking pencils to the floor when he thinks she needs a break. To everyone who shared their own stories in the comments or sent messages, thank you. It's been incredible to hear from so many people who found love and family in unexpected ways, or who struggled with critical family members, or who are single parents looking for hope that someone will love both them and their children. Family isn't about biology or traditional timelines. It's about showing up for each other day after day in all the small ways that matter. And to anyone currently dealing with family members who make them feel less than for their choices, you are enough exactly as you are. Your life doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be valuable and complete. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply living authentically and finding joy in your own path, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. The cats and I were happy before James and Sophie joined our family. We're happy now too, just in a different, louder, more chaotic way. Both versions of my life were good, they were just different chapters of the same story.